Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Everyday Farmers Conference. We are talking all about ruminants and getting started with sheep and goat, your flocks and herds. Today, we are talking about buying your first flock or herd. This is you're new, you don't have any animals, and you're deciding to look into purchasing either a goat or a sheep. And so today, I've got two wonderful ladies. I've got Kimmy Trowbridge and Rachel Hester, and all three of us are going to just kind of discuss how we went about buying our flocks and our herds. And before we get into the questions, though, I'm going to have these ladies introduce themselves. So Rachel, you go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rachel Hester, and we started Whoopsie Daisy Farm about 3 years ago. We actually came to the name, there's a song by an artist named Toby Mac, and he's got a song called Catch a Fire, but the phrase is, whoopsie daisy, call me crazy, somebody gotta catch a fire. And we were like, that's so fitting, we caught this fire for natural farming, and we are so crazy. So we're like, we'll just be Whoopsie Daisy Farm. And Catch a Fire was too Hunger Games-ish for me, so we did Whoopsie. So we kind of got into this about 5 years ago. My husband works in emergency services, and he donated bone marrow to a cancer patient, and his health just went flat. So I started doing a bunch of research and started learning that basically the food we were eating was a standard American diet, and it wasn't helping either of us. So we started trying to get more healthier foods and sourcing it, from sustainable sources and places we knew, and also that were cheaper. As I was learning about these different ways people are raising food, you start learning about farming. And so my husband was like, well, we could just get a farm and just raise our own food and it would be cheaper. Which anyone who has a farm knows that is so laughable because it's not cheap. I mean, it's fulfilling, but it's not cheaper. So we then, around the same time, caught a swarm of bees and started trying to keep honeybees, which I'm sure everyone's familiar, is very difficult. Kentucky climate in the spring and fall is just really not conducive to how honeybees work. So that kind of led us more into a natural beekeeping approach, which then kind of led us to more of a creating a like a microclimate or a little what's the word I'm looking for, just creating the farm as like I'm trying to say, I want to say subclimate, but it's not subclimate. What's the word I'm looking for?
Like your own ecosystem.
That's the word I'm looking for. An ecosystem. Like it's right there. Anyway, making an ecosystem out of a farm. So anyway, we had been looking at getting goats actually, and then COVID hit, and there were just some sheep available. So we were like, well, we'll just start with sheep instead. So, but anyway, we kind of dabble in permaculture and biodynamics. Like, we're not certified in any of them, but we try to use more organic approaches, just as that kind of keeps the food products we're producing a little bit more cleaner, which is how why we got into this all in the first place. But anyway, that's kind of us and our farm. We're still learning. We're kind of life learners. We don't really know what we're doing. We're just trying to have fun while we do it, is really the catchphrase of everything we do. So that's me.
All right, go ahead, Kimmy.
All right, I'm Kimmy Trowbridge, and we own Brandley Farms. We started about 5 years ago, just kind of moving out of the city, moved to the country, had no background in farming, don't have any family members in farming. My family thinks I'm crazy, but I've always loved animals, and it was always something I was passionate about, something I wanted to do. So as soon as I could, and as soon as my husband would allow me to, we moved out. We got a few acres. We started with some chickens, then goats, moved on to ducks, miniature cows, and eventually sheep. So we are actually in the process of a very big move from Southeast Louisiana to California. So I will be going through the buying of my herd and flock all over again for the second time around. So hopefully I'll be able to share some mistakes I made the first time around, some things I did right the first time around, and then hopefully I'll be able to learn from that as well as we talk through this and as I prepare for purchasing my next herd and flock.
Awesome. So for us, it's kind of a little bit of both your guys' stories. I'm a city girl. I grew up in Orange County, California. We had orange groves, but those quickly disappeared into buildings.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't into the farm anything, really. I did horse riding, and that was basically it. And then I met my husband, and his dream was to have cows. And mine was to be a stay-at-home mom. So I was like, okay, if you allow me to be a stay-at-home mom, then I will do everything in my power to get you your cows. And that's kind of how we were for a while. We were in California, so we couldn't afford any land. So we moved over to where we are now, which is Murfreesboro, Tennessee. It's middle Tennessee. And we got this land, and for, oh gosh, how long ago was it? It was 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even 6. I started to have really bad health problems, to the point where I was like writhing in pain every night for hours. And it wasn't until we got to Tennessee that I went to see a specialist, and they told me, you can't eat like 80 to 90% of what normal people can eat. It was basically your body just can't handle a lot of this stuff. And one of them was what we thought was dairy. The only, milk available was goats and sheep, or goats and cows. And I couldn't handle either of those. So I just went, oh, well, I guess I'm going to be living a life without dairy. Which ice cream is like my, that is like my lost on a desert island, only thing I want to eat. So to be told that I couldn't have ice cream, I was like, oh, that is like my worst nightmare. And so for probably 2 years, that's kind of what we thought. And my sister's actually the first one who kind of wanted to get into sheep, and we thought she was crazy. And we're like, sheep, why? Like, where did that come from? And then she introduced me to Manchego cheese, which is a sheep cheese. And we found out I could eat it. And then I visited my husband's family, and his sister-in-law introduced me to a sheep's milk ice cream place in Paso area. And I just was like, I came back from visiting there with my stomach not feeling horrible, and just like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do. Like, I even if it doesn't become a business, I was like, I need this in my life. And so we came home, and we decided that we needed to tour some places, look into sheep, dairy sheep specifically. And that's kind of how it kind of morphed into us. I think I visited the ice cream place in July. We visited the dairy sheep farm that we actually ended up buying our sheep from, I think in like August. Or September, and then we bought lambs from them in February. So there wasn't a lot of like, let's take time to think about this. It was, if you're going to have any sort of dairy in your life, you have to have sheep, because it's just not available. Like, sheep's milk is just nowhere. You can't really buy it. So it's like, you have to do this. And so we were just like, okay, let's jump right in. And so even through this experience, I'm like learning all these things, and I'm like, oh, I should have done a lot of this differently. So that's kind of why I'm putting this together, is just realizing, with everybody's different experiences, we're all going to learn from each other. And I want other people who are getting into this to really kind of absorb some of what we did wrong and maybe hopefully pick up on the things we did right and kind of move from there. So so that's kind of where I'm at, and we'll get into the questions. Did you guys need to do any land prep before you guys got any of your ruminants?
We definitely did. We were, like I said, when we first started, we were on 2.5 acres. We had since moved. We're on about 20 acres now, but we had to set up fencing. We had to build pens. We had some outbuildings that converted very nicely to shelter for them, from my goats, which is what we started with first. And we just kind of set up pens. They were much smaller than what we have now, but at both locations, we had to do a lot of land prep.
Yeah, we bought a foreclosed property that had been used as a essentially trailer park, and then before that was hay fields. So any fencing on our property we've put in ourselves, which, let me tell you, the animals are the cheapest thing to purchase when you're farming. It's like everything else is more expensive than the freaking animals, which I didn't realize going in. So actually the other day I was just having one of those days, and I was like, let's just sell this property and we'll just buy a smaller place with all the infrastructure already there. And my husband's like, do you really feel that way? And I'm like, no, but but I mean, I think that's just part of, you know, kind of, if you want to do a small traditional farm, which it kind of sounds like all of us are kind of doing, it is becoming more common, but it hasn't been common. So, you know, that kind of leaves a pro and con, because on the one hand, you get to put in what you want and it's the way you want it. Hopefully. Unless you're doing it like us, we're salvaging everything. And we're like, okay, well, maybe that pallet will fit there, hopefully. And maybe that little piece of chicken wire will attach to that part of whatever else. You know, but on the flip side, you have to do it or it's a huge expense and that kind of stuff. So I think, you know, that's just kind of the double-edged sword of getting into farming right now that I think a lot of us are starting to realize is that, you know, if you're not going to do field crops or some mega something, you're going to have to add that into the factor of you will have to put in a lot of the infrastructure. So, you know, budget accordingly or swipe the credit card accordingly, whichever your philosophy is. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Later on, but have your infrastructure in place before you buy an animal. Make sure that you have everything in place before you go home with that animal, because it takes a while to set up a proper structure.
Yeah. Which I will say, I mean, it is funny. Like every conference I've listened to or farmer I've talked to, we all say that, and the actual percentage of people who actually follow that advice is very small. I mean, we stuck our sheep in the dog yard for the first 2 weeks till we finished a little paddock area. I mean, at some point you will probably do it, but don't do that. So.
Yeah, for us, we were kind of lucky because we got our property assuming we were going to do cows. So we wanted to do something that was like appropriate for cows, which just means that the fencing was decent, like really strong. And it had, and my husband wanted to do rotational grazing. So it has its own pastures. Like it has two little kind of smaller ones on the side and then a large one in the back and then a little tiny section for like the males in like the way back. So we had different sections, but everything was overgrown because we didn't have any animals. We didn't have like any equipment to keep the grass and stuff to not be crazy. We actually ended up having to borrow, you know, ask for like some friends to come over and like, you know, get all the brush clearance out because like we just didn't have it. And they were like, well, you want to use this? And we're like, yes, please. We don't have to pay for this. And then attached to one of our pastures is actually a dog run that has a barn on it. So we've got like two barns, one that's a little smaller and then one that's a bigger one that has its own stalls. And so like we were fortunate enough to kind of know that we were going to get some sort of animal when we bought our property. And so we kind of picked like, oh, this one could be used for this, and this. The smaller barn, actually, the people before us had a dog kennel. So it actually has little stations within the barn, which we've used for like lambs. So like if a lamb was not, we got lambs first. And so if there was a lamb that was struggling with weight, we just stuck her in like a side section and was like, okay, we have to feed her separately because the other ones won't let her eat. But we did very much the same thing where it was like, okay, we have all this stuff, but what is the minimum amount that we can do and fix to make this work? So like the fencing in this one, in the one pasture, just needed a few stakes and like to tie it up. They actually had like a setup for like an electric fence, but somehow things were cut or whatever. So it's like, it was there, but you can't really use it. And that's kind of, that's kind of like our house and our property. It's like people like, they tried doing this by themselves. And like, we have professionals come in and go, they should not have done this. And that's like, anytime we have anyone come into our house or our land that's like, well, this is nice, it's totally jerry-rigged and like could like blow up in your face. Which, you know, when you go into a property, if you have no idea what you're looking for, you're just like, well, this looks nice.
Right.
Like our biggest barn doesn't have any like it has set up for electricity, but like there's wires hanging everywhere. There's like things where I'm like, I don't even want to touch it because you could electrocute yourself. So that's like the thing where I'm like, okay, like, yes, you want infrastructure, but it's okay to do like the bare minimum because you will have time to kind of expand out. As long as you make sure that that like you project how long you're going to need this one section. Like our babies were in the dog run, but the dog run attached to the bigger pasture. So as soon as they got big enough, it was like, yeah, let them go to the pasture. And then we realized we have a male who we didn't want them getting pregnant too early. So we had to fix the other pasture to move him over so that they were separated for a little bit. And so it's like, we do this for our money too. It's like, okay, this month, what absolutely needs to be done and fixed, and how much can we do this particular month? And then if there's something that's like, you know, yeah, this is important, but not like immediate, it's like that needs to shove off to the next month, and then we'll review it next month. Because we are on a very strict budget. So, but yeah, so it sounds like we had a little bit more structure than like you, Rachel, and even you, Kimmy. So we were kind of able to jump in a little faster because of that. But that's not always a good thing.
Well, I think it depends on what your perspective is. I mean, for us, we wanted, because we knew we were probably going to have to do a lot of soil regeneration when we moved someplace, like wherever we moved, we were going to have to build the soil up. And so for us, our perspective was like, we moved in October, and then that March, I think we bought our first chickens, just because we wanted animals on that soil ASAP, just to get that soil microbiota going as soon as possible. And so we actually bought like really our story is probably, here's all the things you shouldn't do, and somehow we did it, and somehow nothing's died or yet, aside from the normal farm things that happen. So we bought 3 used chicken tractors from an Amish friend of ours, and you know, we got them to our property and looked at them, and we tried moving them without any birds in them, and we were just like, these will not be our forever tractors. Like, they should only be maybe 2.5 week tractors, and we're still using those horrible things. But it got us into farming, and it got animals on our property. So I think, you know, it depends on what your goals are and your perspectives and your why. I mean, we knew coming in we were going to have to do soil regeneration because of where we're at in Kentucky. So we just knew we wanted to get animals on as soon as possible. And like, I'm a big researcher. I love reading all the books, and anyone who's in farming knows the animals do not read the same books that we do. I really wish they would. And they don't follow the schedules in the books either. So we knew we needed to start getting some experience on a small scale. We just, you know, we weren't going to buy 300 Cornish cross chickens. I think we bought 15 or 20 chickens our first year, and then we just kind of started adding up to there. So all that being said, I mean, I think if you know you've got back problems in a full-time job and you want it to be easy, start someplace that has the infrastructure you want, and you get like you do it in small bite sizes that you know you can manage. But I mean, like, I just work on the farm, so it was like, well, if something horrible happens, like, I'll be there at least to deal with whatever they come up with. So, and you know, every single farm's different. Like there are no two farms that are exactly the same, which is really awesome and really terrifying too at the same time. I mean, no two farmers the same. No, you know, even if we all have small ruminants and all our farms are completely and totally different. So, you know, I just think for people watching this, that's one thing, if they haven't gotten into it, to kind of keep in mind of just really think like, what do you think you can handle? Like if you want to have it your way with your paddocks and your sizes made out of your materials, then buying a place with no infrastructure is great because you could just put all that in. I mean, if you're a single woman who weighs 87 pounds sopping wet, maybe don't do that. you know, so anyway, there's my little 2 cents on that. So.
All right, we good to go to the next question?
Yeah.
Okay, so for like us, picking like sheep was not like we couldn't pick anything other than sheep just because of that's what I could handle. So for you guys, how did you guys decide whether you wanted sheep or goats, or for you, like Kimmy, like what kind of drew you to having 2 different types, having goats and sheep? Kind of what was your thought process on that?
So we started out with goats. I picked a miniature breed because mostly I'm doing everything myself. My husband helps with the heavy lifting, but all the animal husbandry is up to me. I'm the one actually physically out there handling them. And I'm 5 feet tall. I weigh more than 87 pounds soaking wet, but I knew I needed an animal I could handle. So we went with Nigerian dwarf goats. I just thought they were the cutest little things, and I wanted them for dairy purposes, and I knew that they would make decent dairy goats. So we got them, fell in love with them. I've had dogs all my life, and to me, I think they're very similar in personality to dogs. They will come and curl up on your lap if you handle them often, and they will give you love and affection back. But they are spunky and they are tricky. And I was thinking about infrastructure when we were talking. Sometimes it's also you build your infrastructure and you're so proud of yourself and patting yourself on the back. And then the goat says, oh yeah, that's gonna be really easy to jump right over that, or to jump up on a stand, then up on the roof, then up and over a fence. And they teach you all the places that you need to reinforce, and you need to all the little holes that the babies can get out of. So they're fun, but they are they're my problem children. I got a little later, and I am partial to the sheep milk. I like the goat milk, but really like the taste of the sheep milk. So I wanted to add that to our farm. And we went ahead and got them, and I always tease with my husband and say, if I would have gotten the sheep first, I probably would have never gotten the goats. They are so sweet and so docile. They'll follow you anywhere. They're not escape artists. They're just really calming to watch, and very opposite of my little problem children. But really, for me, at the end of the day, I need them both. I need to go and have like a bit of a challenge and wrestle around with the goats and enjoy their spunkiness. And then sometimes I just need to be in the sheep pen where they're calm and they're just so sweet. So that's kind of how I came about getting both of them. But for me, they're both dairy animals. So that was what really drove me to get the sheep and the goats.
I think it's funny that you say the sheep are calmer, because they definitely are. And that they, like, the animals will tell you what parts of your field are
Yes
not quite strong enough. When we moved in, the people before us stole our gates. They weren't supposed to take them, and we arrived and we had no gates. So there's one part of the fence that my husband like reinforced, and then all of a sudden we came home one day and I see our ram like out of the pen hanging out in like this grassy area, and I'm like, what happened? We'd been gone for hours. So I was like, when did this happen? How long has he been out? and it was the ram. The girls were like, didn't even notice that he had opened an area, and I was like, this is not good. But it was like, it's one of those, like, yeah, definitely, like, I feel like the long running idea is that like goats are a little bit more trouble and like a little bit more of that personality, but definitely sheep have their side.
Oh yeah,
especially the boys. Especially
yeah.
the boys.
Well,
yeah.
if I could just add one more thing, I find, and this may be different for other people's flocks and other people's herds, but I find that there's a very strong hierarchy with the goats. My smallest female was the boss. Like, she led everybody and they listened to her, and she ate first. And I mean, there was a very strict hierarchy. With my sheep, there was definitely my female who was in charge. Her name was Barbara. But she was more docile with the other animals. It wasn't as much of a it's my way or the highway. They just followed her more so. So that was kind of a different dynamic that I've experienced with the herd versus the flock as well.
And can you say what breed of sheep you have?
Yeah, I have Katahdin. They're a hair sheep. So I did not, living in Southeast Louisiana, I knew I wanted a dairy sheep, but I knew that I did not want to be fooling with wool, and I needed it to be an animal that could handle the heat. So I went with them, and it worked out very well.
Thank you. All right, Rachel, what about you? What kind of drew you? Because I know you'd mentioned that you were like thinking about goats and then moved over to sheep. So explain kind of your thought process on that.
Well, again, it was kind of funny. I don't know where I got this idea in my head, if I read it or someone said it, but for some reason I just had this idea that goats were easier than for some reason. Or that they were hardier or more parasite. I don't know. It was one of those just weird ideas where you're like, where did I even come up with that? Like, not in any of the books, and no one agrees with that. So where did this go? Anyway, so that's just what I had in my head. And we had bought goat milk from some Amish friends of ours for almost a year, and then they had to sell their flock. And so we just noticed we were tolerating the goat milk a lot better than the cow milk, even though we were getting A2 and, you know, farm fresh and organic and blah, blah, blah. But we didn't like the lack of butter fat in the goat milk. It was almost like drinking skim milk, which we both have, you know, traumatic memory of skim milk and Cheerios back in the day. Like, we need a little bit more butter fat. And so I just was looking for a breed that had a higher butterfat content in the goat milk. And so I stumbled across, I think in an Acres USA article that someone had just given me about, I think it was just an article on, you know, off the wall or rare breeds of goats to have on your farm. And that's when I stumbled on an article on the San Clemente Island goats. And they mentioned that they were critically endangered. And I didn't know anything about the Livestock Conservancy or anything like that at that point. And I was like, a critically endangered goat breed? What? No, there's no, livestock's not endangered. What are they talking about? So anyway, so I just looked it up and, you know, found the Livestock Conservancy website and was like, all these breeds are like, they're really in danger. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. Like, so anyway, we talked about it, you know, since we have honeybees and we do things organically and we're kind of conservation minded anyway, we're like, oh, well, we'll just get a critically endangered breed because, you know, you just run to Walmart and grab some of those. They're everywhere if they're so endangered. And, you know, again, we were like, we're going to do goats because those are easier. And I joined the Facebook group for the San Clemente Island goats, and everyone there is just super friendly and very helpful. And even if you don't have goats, like they want to help you out and they want you to be successful farmers. So we're just like, okay, well, we're just going to get goats. Well, COVID hit and the dumpster fire that is 2020 took over our lives. And, you know, I have friends, like I don't have a type friend. Like I will make friends with, you know, a tree trunk if it'll talk back to me basically. So I'm on all these off the wall groups and several of them are kind of paranoid. And so, my husband works 24-hour shifts, so it's late at night, and I'm reading all these, like, the end of the world is coming, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what if the national grid dies and, then the zombies will attack and it'll all just be bad. We'll have no food source. So, because everyone in Kentucky hunts, so there will be no red meat. So, I'm not even, that is how the thought process went. So we weren't going to get these goats we had been signed up to get because no one was traveling and everything. And so we were like, well, we should just get some ruminants really fast, just in case, like, we can't get, meat or whatever, and the end of the world really does happen. We can hold out a little bit longer. So a lady I had talked to at fiber festivals, I just went on her website, and she just happened to have a couple of sheep for sale. And my husband's like, well, let's just get these 2 sheep and just see if we like them, and we'll have ruminants, and if we don't like them, they're edible. So, we'll just grab them. And they were, or are, I should say, border lesters, which, I mean, I'm a fiber artist. I've knit for 20, I'm actually knitting right now when you all aren't looking.
Oh, wow.
So, I'm also hyperactive. I have to keep my hands busy. I get really off the wall. And so I really didn't want, like, honestly, that was my biggest bummer with goats, is I'm like, they don't have fiber. Like, they, all you do is look at them and pet them. You can't, like, shear them or whatever. And so we got these border lesters, and the ewe is an absolute sweetheart. The weather, again, he didn't read the books. He does not know how weathers are supposed to be. He's still actually very so he's going to freezer camp as soon as we can get him in, because he's just causing us all kinds of, I mean, like, he will run at the fence and try to break it down if we wear a different color shirt or something like that. I mean,
Oh, wow. He's
not acting like a border lester. He's acting like some, I don't know. So we got them, and we just really like sheep. Like, I was shocked how much my husband likes sheep, because he grew up around cows. And so the whole small ruminant thing, he was like, okay, honey, I'll do it for you. And, you got scared late at night, I'll just buy you these 2 sheep. And he got them, and he's like, I don't even know if we really need to get goats, because I just really like these sheep. Well, then we started actually, like, kind of talking to our farmer friends, and the local Amish are kind of our big local mentors as far as farming goes. And they were all like, oh yeah, if a fence doesn't hold water, it won't hold a goat. And we were like, oh, really? I thought goats were easier. And they were like, where did you even get? No, goats, they're just they're great. They're just, like you said, they're the problem children. I mean, they're the ones who are like, oh, a fence? Well, I think it'll take me 30 minutes to get out of that. And, our sheep were like, oh, you got a pallet propped up by a cinder block? Okay, we'll go over here. As long as there's not clover on the other side of the fence. That is the one caveat. So I am the poster child of, here is what not to do, and somehow it works, because, like, then I saw on Facebook, I was intrigued by the dairy sheep aspect of things, and I was like, oh, well, let's just try some dairy sheep and see. And so these twins in Ohio came up for sale, and they were like, oh, well, let's just try some dairy sheep. And so we ran up and got them and brought them back and tried sheep milk, and our lives have never been the same again. So then just kind of going on the critically endangered list, these Gulf Coast Island sheep came up for sale. And I've been kind of looking at the breed as like a maybe someday kind of thing. And these sheep were within driving distance, and they were the right price. And so again, my husband, who was usually not like this at all, he's usually like, we need to think about it, talk about it, pray about it, fast for 3 years, and talk to 5 more people. And then after we budgeted for a couple more years, then we'll talk about it. Like, he's not a jump in, and he's like, yeah, let's just drive to 3 different states and get more sheep. So now we have this very eclectic herd of these random breeds, and they're all sweethearts, and they all have names. They eat out of our hands, except for that stupid weather. So that's how we got into sheep. And not goats, but I would like to get some goats at some point, just because, like you said, I still would like to just kind of see how they compare to the sheep, and then all stuff.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. You should. I mean, they're full of personality. I think I will always have both.
Yeah.
I think I always need my little goat time, my challenge, and I think I'll always need my little sweet sheep time. So
Well, it's like when people ask me, do I prefer, because I have ducks and chickens and a couple of geese, and people ask me all the time, well, which do you like more, chickens or ducks? And it's like, I mean, you cannot be a Dutch baby made with duck eggs. I mean, that is just the best thing in the world. But you scrambled eggs made with farm fresh chicken eggs are just amazing, and they both do different things for different insect populations, and they have different nutrients and manure, which is a whole nother discussion for another time. But you know, having more diversification on a farm is not necessarily a bad thing. It's more a question of where do you start and why. And in my case, impulse buying late at night, slightly paranoid with credit cards. So there you go.
Yeah, that was kind of like us too. It's like, you know, we went to so we visited a dairy farm in Alabama. They're called Day Springs Dairy. They do cheese and caramel. And we went down, visited them, asked them a whole bunch of questions, tasted all their stuff. It was absolutely amazing. And it was just basically like we got home and we're like, yes, yes to all of this. Because it was like the first time I'd had caramel in a while. And it's the first time I'd had cheese other than just the manchego you can buy at the store. And I was just like, yes. And so we bought our little lambs from there. And they are East Frisian mostly. East Frisian are supposed to be like one of the best sheep milkers. Like they produce the most milk. Then I think they said that they're also a little bit of the Gulf Coast.
Okay.
Mostly because East Frisians are sensitive, like they don't take heat well. And they're like, so in order for us to have East Frisians in the South with the heat, they were like, we needed to cross them with something that was a little bit more hardy. And I've also found that at least for our sheep, the color of their wool also affects how well they do in the heat. Our dark sheep, we've got 2 black ones and 3 white ones. The 3 white ones don't seem to have any issues. The black ones, you know, if it's over 80, they're like,
yeah. That's how mine is too. I've got mostly whites, but I've got one who's like she's not even like a dark brown. She's she's probably the color of this wood like me. And I mean, whenever it gets above 80 or if it's humid, she just runs for shade and I feel so bad for her, but the white ones have that problem, you know, which is just something to consider when you're buying sheep that I didn't know.
Yeah, and at least for us, so we had, like I said, we started with lambs in February, and the ram ended up, his wool turned brown faster, and so he was able to handle the heat more. Hers took a while for it to go from black to brown, and it seemed like when it was just pure black, it was a lot harder on her, and then as soon as it started to turn brown, she handled it a little bit better. So that's something to keep in mind too, just for sheep in general, is the color. Because I know a lot of people are like, well, I really like the white ones, they look really good, and then some of them are like, I like the ones that are multicolored. And it's like, you know, for us, we were like, we don't care. You know, I was like, I kind of want a little mixture of everything. I don't want them all to be white because then I can't tell them apart. You know, and then when we ended up getting our boy a few weeks later, because we weren't planning to have a ram, and then we realized we kind of needed one. They were like, well, the white male rams are more expensive. And I was like, okay, well then we'll go for a black one. We don't care. You know, because they were a dairy, I guess. Oh, and this is also just a little tidbit for people buying kind of at least lambs, is that lambs are more expensive. I think they said in March when it's around Easter time, because they call them photo lambs. So people will buy them for like photography, and then and those like tend to be more expensive. They're like the white pretty ones. And so like sometimes like the people we were buying them from were very open about, you know, these, if you want this particular one that's like the photo sheep, it's going to cost this. If you don't care, it's going to cost this. And we were like, yeah, we don't care. But like that's something to keep in mind if you're buying lamb specifically, is that the cost does change. Like if we had bought our boy in February instead of early March, he would have been a lot cheaper, even as a black ram, than in March, because the price went up. So that's just something to keep in mind for that too.
Yeah, that's also the case. I've been talking with a lady with who raises Gotland sheep, and she actually her prices will go down a lot if you will get an older sheep versus a younger sheep, because the fiber quality is so different with the younger lambs. That first shearing, it's like with, I don't know if anyone's knit with like baby alpaca versus just regular adult alpaca. I mean, the quality and softness is exponentially different. So if you get fiber animals, if you get them younger, a lot of times they will be more expensive because of the fiber aspect of it. And again, just going back to the whole heat thing, and again, in the fiber world, a lot of people are drawn to what's called natural coloring, where you want like a tan and a darker and a black sheep and all these different palettes that are natural hues, which is great. I mean, it's gorgeous, but then you have to think of the actual animal. I love Sally is the name of our little brown sheep. I mean, she's great, but she has to have a fan down in the barn, and she has to have access to shade. And so it's just something to consider if you want to go on more of a natural color type thing, especially with wool, is that, maybe you will have to take ice cubes out to the bucket if it's really, really, really hot, which I don't mind doing. But, if you've got a herd of 200 sheep, I don't know who does that, but some people do, you may not want to drag that many ice bags out to the field because of your natural colors. So
So I know we kind of talked a little bit about it just in passing, but what was your guys's, I guess, go-to info before you bought your sheep? Like, what was the thing you went to? I know a lot of us do research through books. I think we've mentioned some Facebook groups. Was there any other research you guys did? I mean, I said we did tours. Like we did one tour, but we toured. There are not a lot of dairy like creameries, really anywhere for sheep specifically. So we only had the one option. But did you guys do any extra stuff? Or I guess, what was your research like?
Rachel, you want to go?
Sure. I YouTubed as much as I possibly could, which, when you look up stuff on Google or YouTube or Wikipedia or whatever, I generally try to confirm that information with at least one or two other sources, just because. But they were really good leapfrog places to get to actual personal farmers who had that kind of stuff. I would start following hashtags on Instagram. That's actually, I think, how I found you, Delaney, is because I followed the hashtag dairy sheep because I was curious, and you just kept posting stuff, and I'm like, oh, she looks fun. Follow. Because for me, I was trying to find access to individuals. And so it's like, well, if they're already posting something on YouTube or Instagram, you can send them messages, and then you can have a conversation and start talking to them. So, and then also just, if you're getting into a new type of farming enterprise, I mean, we did not know anything about sheep or goats, a year and a half ago, just because we're in America and that's just not something common. So, I didn't know anything about hoof trimming, or that, horn sheep needed their horns trimmed, or, I mean, really, I knew I wanted fiber, but I don't know anything about shearing, or milling or anything like that. So, I don't remember what the statistic is, but you have to be exposed to new information a certain amount of times before it actually sticks. And so, I was basically just trying to get myself exposed to all these new terms and information, and we did get the stories book of whatever species we were looking at that point. So we got the stories book of dairy goats, and then the stories book of sheep, and then I think I'm gonna butcher her name, Giancalis Caldwell's, I think that's how you say it, Holistic Goat Care, because from what I could tell, and you can probably speak this more than I can, Delaney, with dairy sheep, I really had to go more towards dairy goats for information, just because it's not very common here. And I did look at countries that had dairy sheep, like the Middle East, and Romania has a bunch of stuff. You have to put Google Translate for quite a bit because I don't know what they're saying. But trying to find individuals, social media, trying to just get exposed to all that information. The stories line of books are really fantabulous to just kind of start getting those terms down. And then, Facebook groups. And I really like talking to the individual farmers and just messaging them and asking what their experience was, because again, like, the books are great, but the animals don't read those books. So, everyone has Nigerian dwarf goats now. Like, everyone loves the goats. Everyone loves Nigerian dwarf goats. Very few people say going into it, yeah, they're the problem children on the farm. Like, if there's a problem, it's the Nigerian dwarf. So,
That's true.
talk to a farmer who owns the goats, they're like, yeah, they're the problem children. So, that's just, again, trying to balance your information source. Like, a hashtag on Instagram is only going to show you the positives on this particular thing. YouTubes are trying to get followers, they're going to make it look snazzy. And really, like, if you just send one message with a farmer, they're going to tell you everything's great. And by the way, they happen to have 5 of these animals for sale. Would you like to have them? But, if you can kind of establish a relationship and talk with them, and maybe not get a formal mentorship through them, but just, try to get that, I don't know, like, oh, look at me, I'm a poor, pitiful farmer, and I'm not buying anything just yet. So just tell me your information and don't sell me anything. I think that's a good way to go. So, what about you?
I all the same sources y'all stated already. I definitely Googled obsessively, YouTubed everything I possibly could, Instagram, Facebook. I find everybody in the homestead or small farm community is very willing to share information with each other. So that's always been a great resource. 2 other things I found, because my biggest concern was getting these animals home and not knowing what I was doing to their detriment. So you will get these animals and you will learn trial by error. I mean, there will be things you'll do right and things you'll do wrong. I just didn't want to make big mistakes that would result in animal getting sick or dying because of my ignorance to their need of care. So local vets are a good, establish a relationship with one and make sure before you bring the animal home, research what shots they need, especially once you bring them home, and then maybe what yearly maintenance they're going to need. Somebody had mentioned hoof trimming. That is something you're going to have to do. And if you don't, you can read online about all the horrible things that will happen to your animal if you're not doing it properly. Also, local feed stores. Around here anyway, you go on a Saturday and it's like a big event. Everybody's there. They're getting their whatever, your plants, your baby chickens, your ducks, your hay. So I would go and strike up a conversation and find out that this person buying this particular type of feed also had a herd of goats, and they were feeding this type of feed this time of year because the animal needed more caloric intake. So even just being there and kind of talking with people and trading stories, I learned a lot through that as well. So those vet and local feed stores are 2 things. Farmers markets too. You walk around and you find the person selling the goat milk or the sheep milk, the chicken eggs, and it may cost you, whatever a dozen eggs is, but you can strike up a conversation and pick their brain a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's something definitely to be said about getting like a mentor, just people to talk about in your own community, because they're going to have the experience of the same weather, the same land.
Right.
At least where we are, like on our property, we have a lot of stone. So we've hit a lot of problems trying to stick poles into grounds and hitting rock.
Oh.
And so like those are the kind of things that like you could ask somebody, in a few states over, but they may or may not have that same problem because it's not the same terrain, it's not the same weather. So definitely getting someone in that community. 2 places that I know that have helped me a lot is, I don't know if you ladies watch her, but Sandy Brock on YouTube. She is a Canadian farmer who has like 300 sheep. And she does primarily meat. She's a meat business. But she shows you how to clip hooves. She shows you how to give shots. She will actually show the lambing process. She will like have her camera and actually watch the lamb come out of the ewe, show what their behavior looks like. Hers is mostly sheep, so I don't know if there's anyone equivalent to that for goats.
There's Blue Cactus Dairy, I think is the name of it. Anyway, she doesn't. I only watched a couple of her videos because it was right when we were transitioning from goats to sheep. But I think she did show a couple bursts on YouTube. And I think she posted a couple where it didn't go well. I mean, she had a little thing like, this has a sad ending, just heads up. But she does show like an actual birth. She had the camera in there during labor and that kind of stuff. So I think it's Blue Cactus Dairy Goats. And she has Nigerian Dwarf. She's in Arizona. And she's got a ton of videos on there too. I haven't perused the whole channel, but that might be something if someone wants to do dairy goats to look into.
Yeah, Sandy Brock does the same with sheep. Like she actually shows sometimes the lambs that are not alive. Like she's had a few videos of like how you handle them and stuff like that. She had one that had like 5, I guess, legs that didn't survive. And it was like, she had to pull the lamb out because it was stuck, because it's deformed. And she talks about like, okay, when she sees that, what do you do? Like, obviously this is probably a virus that happened. Okay, let's hope it doesn't go through the rest of the sheep. You know, who do you send it to like get that tested to figure out what's going on? So that she's like someone who, even though I'm not, she's mentioned, she's like, I don't do dairy. So like, don't ask me any dairy questions. Because she's like, because that's a whole other business that I don't know anything about. Because she's Canadian. But she's really great. And then there's a Facebook group that's called Homestead Dairy Sheep that have taught me so much, and they've been so incredibly helpful. I mean, even on just stuff like the other day, I found or I saw one of my neighbors feeding my sheep something.
Did you see my comment on that? I was like,
everyone was like, what? And I was like, yeah. And of course I'm new. I'm like, is this something that's okay? Like, I don't know how to handle this, you know, because he's waving and feeding my sheep. And I'm like, and I think they've had goats. So I was like, is he just assuming that because he's had a goat that he knows what's okay for sheep? Because yes, they're very similar, but then I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. So even like asking like a group like that question, like, how do you handle this? You know, which has nothing to do with like I mean, I guess it does kind of go to their care, but just that they're super helpful. And so those are the like dairy specific or just sheep specific ones that I've watched, and I just am like, wow. Especially for lambing, like Sandy Brock, like if you have never watched an animal give birth,
it's different.
even watching like a cat and a dog, like it's just different when they're larger, you know. And she also talks about like, when do you interfere, like when do you know that something's up and when to step in, because you know, it's like someone who's new, they'd probably just be like, no, it's just taking longer. Like, you know, humans, humans, they vary in like how long it takes too. So they're probably fine. But yeah, but definitely like books and stuff, but books will tell you like every single possible thing that could potentially happen. And like, you probably won't experience all of them. And so it's sometimes can be overwhelming, the information, because you know, especially if you're new and you have no idea. Like there were times I would read stuff and I'm like, what are we doing? You know, like, I remember when we brought our lambs home, and what the dairy told us they did versus what was in the book was very different. And of course I'm like a freaked out mom who's waking up in the middle of the night going like, wait, are we doing this wrong? I'm like, are they starving? Like, oh my gosh, what do we do? because if anyone has ever had a lamb, they know that, like, and I don't know if this is the same with kids, but they want food all the time. Like they will never not cry for food.
I was giving my sheep way too much grain, like way too much grain, because like they would just dive at it. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're starving. I got to give them more. And then they all started having diarrhea and stuff like that. So I don't know if I jumped on that homestead dairy sheep and I'm like, oh my gosh, like what is happening? And they're all like, well, how much grain are you? I mean, because I'm like, they've got some parasite, like they're on the verge of death. And they're like, well, how much grain are you feeding them? And it is hot. And I'm like, oh, like a gallon of grain for a herd of 5 sheep. And they're like, yes, stop. Don't do that. And I was like, okay. And it just magically went away. And I'm like, but they acted like they were starving. And they're like, well, when you were 3.5 and got chucked into a candy store, weren't you starving too? And I'm like, oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, they're not starving.
No, that's a great way to put it too. So when you guys got your sheep, were any of them within the state, or did you guys get your animals that were out of state?
All of mine were in state. I was able to find the breeds I wanted, the ages I wanted, I got lucky with that. They were all within state. Now, some of them might have been 4 or 5 hours away, but I did not have to leave Louisiana to get any of them.
What about you, Rachel?
Most were out of state. I actually listened to the Dearly Woven podcast. I don't know if you all have heard of that. And she was interviewing someone. They're like, oh yeah, try to get all of your flock from like one farm because that minimizes parasite stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I did. So yeah, we traveled despite anti-travel suggestions from our governor. So
did you have to do anything special? I know I mean, I don't know how strict they are, but like there's all these rules on how to transport animals from one state to the next.
I mean, we just put him in the back of the rendezvous and drove. Because you open the door and they all start buying and everyone's like, are you child abusers or what are you doing? But that was kind of it. I mean, I will say the farms that we got from, they did say like they're up to date on parasite treatments and any vaccinations. They all had scrapie tags and that kind of stuff. But we're in rural Kentucky and I have insider information knowing exactly how overworked everyone is who would go inspect such things. So again, don't follow me and what I do. But I mean, we were getting younger sheep from states that were pretty similar than us. I mean, we were just going to bordering states. We weren't traveling very far at all. So, that's what we did.
I'm such like a rule follower that like we did the whole research on like government, like how much are you, like what are you supposed to do? And so when we went to get our 4 girls, they have, I have some stuff to show just so that people know what we're talking about. But when they say scrapie tags, these,
yeah,
are they showing backwards? I think they're backwards. Or is it, I don't know. It looks backwards on my end.
It's showing good.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So they have like these plastic ones the first time we went down. Then they had a metal one. And I guess some of these are government issued. So they buy them in batches or something. And so the first time with the girls, we got these. With the boy, we got the metal tiny like rectangular clips. Mm-hmm. And so of course we bought like the little ear tags. So this is the thing that goes in their ear and you clip them. We first bought the metal one, not realizing there was a difference, and then we had to return it and buy the one for the plastic one. And so then we tagged all the girls' ears because we're like, oh my gosh, that's like what you're supposed to do. And you're like, when they handed it to us, they were like, as long as you have the tags like at home, you're fine. They don't actually need to be on the ear. But we were like, well, we're new. Let's try it. We've never done the ear tagging, so let's just see how it goes. And it all went pretty good. But when we brought our boy home a month later, I get there, and all of a sudden, one of the girls' ears is in 2. because she's got it tagged and pulled. And from that point on, I was like, okay, I don't care. Like, let's not tag. I think you have to have it tagged if you're going to get them processed. Like if you're going to take them someplace and have them turned into meat, I think they're like required to have their tag on, which is why we still have this and didn't sell it.
Yeah.
But like they tell you they have to be on, and then you talk to the farmer and they're like, no, they just have to be like in your front seat. The other thing that they said we had to do was get a vet certificate that said everything was fine. So of course we did the whole like vet certificate, the vet saying it was good, everything's fine. Because we were like terrified that they were gonna pull us over on the border and be like, we need to see your papers.
Right.
I don't know if that's a California mindset of like, you just have to be careful of borders.
Yeah, that's a state thing, because I grew up in New Mexico and I'd spent a small jaunt in California too. And, you know, we're driving in from North Carolina, which no one's supposed to be there at all right now because of COVID. And we just blew in, grabbed stuff, blew out, whatever. And I was like, again, I mean, my husband's a cop, so he's just like, you have to think, like, for these to actually be laws, they have to be enforced. And who's going to enforce them? I've not gotten any mandates to enforce this, so we don't have to worry about this. And I'm like, oh, that's one perspective on that. But I think with the, like, just to point out with the scrapie tags, just for people who don't know, scrapie is, from what I understand, a very contagious disease that if one sheep gets it, your whole flock gets it. And it's very disgusting and gross and painful for the sheep, and they don't have a cure for anything at this point. Is that right? Or I don't know that. I just know you don't want it. And so basically, if your flock gets scrapie, and it like a vet diagnosed as scrapie, the government will come out and take out your herd, because then you're endangering the rest of the state. So anyways, I mean, there's some farmers that are trying to breed for scrapie resistance and yada, yada, yada. But basically the ear tag is just a way for them to keep track of who's got sheep, where the sheep at, just in case this horrible disease comes and wipes everything out. So, you know, yay 2020 and infectious disease paranoia kicking in again. But again, like, because we've had our weather ripped his out. And I found it was like illegal to remove. And I'm like, well, Tim, you just broke the law. So your penalty is death. We're going to eat you for that. But, you know, you need to have it just so there's that registration again. And you can show, should you be inspected, you know, you did check those boxes, just so you're not being a complete irresponsible farmer with this disease that could, is it in the United States right now? I think this is all fairly preventative. It's not an actual threat. It's just in places like England where they have had this, it's been really bad. So we don't want to fool with it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and even for us, like when we went down to get our boy, like we didn't go as strict as we were with the girls, because we realized we were probably being like overly protective and overly like making sure everything's fine. And so like, and we're like, and he's from the same farm, so like it's not like we're getting like weird, like someone's backyard kind of situation, you know, where it's like really like not a great situation kind of a thing. So like we were like pretty safe. They're like, yeah, he'll be fine. So like we were like super psychotic on the first one. So when we went down to get the boy, we were just a little bit more like, no, whatever. And so I mean that's just kind of 2 points of views of like, you know, I'm just one of those, like, I don't like breaking rules. And so like that's just my personality. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So I was like, I just want to, and my husband's a little bit like, I just don't want to be pulled over, you know? And I'm like, okay, well, so you got like 2 psychotic people who are like, we have to do this exactly this way. And then realizing, okay, no, you can chill a little bit.
I think that's great, because I mean, there's going to be people watching this who are going to be like, what are the laws and what are the rules and want to follow?
Yeah.
And I mean, again, as a wife of a police officer, those kind of people are very appreciated in society because it makes his job adventuresome. But then there is also reality. I mean, yeah. You know, the reality for us was we have 48-hour windows. About once a month we can go get animals, and it was like we're dealing with small private farmers who, they were showing us pictures. We could Skype them. They were showing us their setup. Like, we knew they were clean. We knew they were really caring for these animals. And just us, we made a judgment call of, you know what, we're just going to go try it and do it. And if it works, great. If not, okay. And again, I think that's a personal, if I was investing in like a $50,000 purebred Kentucky racehorse, I wouldn't be that lackadaisical about this. I would be a little more paranoid as well. But for $100 sheep,
Do they do scrapie tags for goats, Kimmy?
Honestly, not that I know of. I know there are some diseases that sheep and goats both get. That's not something I'm familiar with. And it's not something, none of my animals are tagged. Like I said, I had gotten them all within state. And I also don't have any purebreds, nothing with papers. I don't show any of my animals. So kind of my buying process has been a little more relaxed as well. I did do a little research at the time when I thought I would be taking my animals all the way to California. And that was like a whole nother, just getting transportation to haul almost 16 head of animal plus 5 dogs, 2 birds, and then the ducks and the chickens. I knew I wouldn't be able to bring them. And I know a lot of states require different things. So just going down that path, I knew hauling all of the animals out there wasn't economical, and it wasn't going to be fair to the animals probably to put them through a 10-day journey. But I know that definitely having your vet papers, you're supposed to have those. I know just because we are transporting our dogs and they need to be up to date on shots, and we have to have the vet papers, and I'm a rule follower as well, and those are our babies. I'm like, what if they get stuck and our dogs get confiscated? We have to have everything correct. That way, they arrive in California safely. So, but as far as the scabies, I'm not sure with the goats.
So for you guys, how did you guys transport your animals from where you bought them?
I had a small horse trailer that we had bought off of Craigslist and kind of fixed it up a little bit, and we've hauled animals in that. We've also hauled animals in the back of my husband's truck with dog crates. And then I've hauled babies on my lap. Just if we're going from point A to point B, I've just sat in the front seat with a towel and had them on my lap. So I've kind of done a little bit of everything.
What about you, Rachel?
We did the dog crate thing, which is our favorite, honestly, apart from holding them on our lap. I haven't done that with sheep yet, just because they've been too big to do that. Our first 4, we had just a flatbed trailer that like you get at Lowe's or whatever, and then it had a back gate that flipped up, and we actually took 2 cattle panels and put them over the top as like a frame. And then we covered it with a tarp. I don't know if we'll cover it with a tarp again. I mean, the tarp was there more for the animal, just to have some shade or whatever, but going down the highway, it just ripped this very expensive tarp to ribbon, which isn't the end of the world, just we were out that money for, a 4-hour trip. So, for larger animals, we did like the cattle panel over the trailer, just because, you get an animal that is decides they don't need to go on that trailer, and they will, the one sheep had scooched the hay bale over to the gate, had crawled up on it and was trying to like worm her way through this gap. So then we took baler twine and like wove it together so she couldn't do that. I mean, it just looks so, the Clampets have come to town. We're driving through Ohio and everyone's just looking at us, we're like, hey. So, just know if you do the cattle panel thing, make sure there's no like more than a foot gap, because they will try to get out of it, and they may not succeed in getting free, but they can maybe hang themselves or something terrible, which you don't really want. So I think we always put like a bale or 2 of hay, and they had something to lay down behind because of the winds going there. But yeah, that's been it so far. I would prefer to use like a horse trailer if we do have to do something like that again. But I think if you're gonna I'm assuming goats would be worse than sheep, but if you're gonna have sheep, I would prefer there be a lid of some kind over whatever they're in, just so they don't get spooked by something and decide to go graze at the, gas station little piece of grass between them and the highway, So
Yeah.
how did you get it, Delaney?
So so we had lambs. The first 4 girls we got were all within a week old. One of them was actually born the day before we got her.
Oh, wow.
So we were feeding her colostrum as we're going back home. And so what we did is we borrowed a dog, like a large dog crate from someone at my husband's work. Because we just didn't have one at the time. We do now because we got a Great Pyrenees, and so like we are going to have a big dog. But at the time I was like, I don't want to buy a huge crate because we're only going to do this once. Not realizing. And so I had all 4 of the little lambs in the crate at once, and they slept most of the way back. And the people we got them from were like, we fed them before. They were about 3 hours away. So wasn't that long of a drive, and they were like, and we fed them right before you guys got here, so they should be good to go till you get there. They were very, very good about the animals. They still contact us and will be like, your sheep look really great, and so like those are really good people to like, that if you buy something like your animals from somewhere and they're like still keeping up with you and still going, hey, how are your animals doing? That's always a good sign that they take care of their own animals and that they also care about the animals that are going out of their farm as well. But yeah, we did a dog crate with a bottle of colostrum for the one lamb. And then for the boy, we did the same. He had a lot more room. And I think he was a little older. We got him about a month later, but he wasn't as small as the girls were. So we think he was probably only a week or 2 younger than they were. But yeah, and I'm trying to remember, I think we kept forgetting to put anything like underneath. So like there's poop and pee everywhere. And then the crate, we don't have a truck, so it was in a minivan. We still only have a minivan, so like I have hay in the back of my minivan that sprays everywhere. Like we get groceries in the back, and I'm like lugging them in. I was like, why is there hay all over my kitchen? It's like, oh, because there's hay in the car, and the groceries were on the hay. So like eventually we want a truck, but we're like, we just make do with what we got, and we got a minivan. So
the Pinterest farmhouse look, it's a myth. Just for anyone who doesn't have a farm yet, the whole Pinterest farmhouse, the hashtag farmstead stuff, farmhouse stuff. No, like we have our carport is where we keep our hay right now, and all our farm vehicle is my grandma's 2014 Rendezvous. And I mean, it works, but
there's some people I've seen on like Pinterest and Instagram that like their house is so beautiful, and I'm just like, how come there's not but like chicken poop,
right,
and hay and like sheep stuff all like splattered all over your floor? Because I know mine is.
Summer on the hashtag, like summer on the farm means there's not a clean dish in your entire house.
The farmhouses that are all white, I'm like, like you. I'm like, how does that, like, I want to go and live, I want to be a fly on your wall and see like how much you actually have to clean to make that work. Because that's not me.
right.
Anyway, there's a little real life on the farm rant for y'all who are watching.
So I don't know if we actually discussed how many and what sex, like I know Rachel, you mentioned you have a wether, but if you guys could just kind of talk about the numbers that you have and the ratio of females to males, and if you do have any, what's the castrated male term for a goat? Is it wether too?
No, it's let me think about this. It's it might be wether. I want to say, let me think about it. something else.
Okay. But here, we'll start with Rachel, with just your numbers and sex and
Sure.
all that good stuff.
Birds and the bees farm, y'all. My husband, like, the barnyard humor thing, it makes sense why that's a phrase, the barnyard humor, because it's like there's certain things you just have to make jokes about, otherwise you're gonna just sob because it's kind of traumatic. Anyway,
Who is gonna be part of your conversation? Like, sorry.
It is. I mean, if you don't have a male on your farm, get really used to saying the word, drumroll please, semen, because you're gonna have to import it in, and you're just gonna have to be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, the next term is AI. Just kidding.
All right. So when we bought our first 2 sheep, we bought a boy and a girl. He was not weathered yet, and he was. We will never do this again. We basically, to get it done by a vet was going to be more expensive than we paid for the animal. So we thought we'll just do it ourselves. We had a friend come over, and don't do that. that is one thing where I'm like, don't do it. So I don't know. I think he was actually intended to be a meat animal on the farm we bought him from, which I didn't know to ask that. So he just wasn't treated as well as his sister, who was going to be a fiber animal. So he was going to be our ram companion, and as you picked up, he's not going to be that. So the farm we bought our ram from, they actually contacted me the day before we went down there and said, hey, we've got this little wether. He's actually very sweet, got great fiber. He'd be a great buddy. You know, they named a very reasonable price. And we're like, you know what? He's going to need a friend. Let's just grab him. So we currently have 2 wethers, a ram, and then 4 ewes. With our situation, so we've got a border Leicester ewe, and then an Awasi Icelandic cross for 2 of the other ewes, and then a Gulf Coast Island ewe for the 4th one. We're wanting to kind of move more towards into Gulf Coast Island sheep, and then potentially Gotland sheep, because the lady I'm talking to, just the amounts of milk she's talking about is pretty decent for just one of those rare breeds. So since these are all rare breeds, it's kind of hard to just call your neighbor and be like, hey, can I borrow your boy for an afternoon so I can knock my girls up and have milk in the spring? It's just not really feasible. So there's a book the Livestock Conservancy put out, I think it's Managing Breeds for a Better Future or something like that. Anyway, if you have 2 rams on property, that is better because you don't have to keep selling your ram and bringing in a new one. So it just gives you more options. Really, from what I can tell, because this was someone's dissertation, it is so detailed and complex, and I feel really dumb reading it, but it's got great information, so I keep trying. What I can tell, 3 rams would be better, just because then you've got like 1 ram the first year, and I've got poison ivy, so please disregard that. You've got 1 ram here, again, real life on a farm. You breed him, and then you bring your 2nd ram in to breed those daughters, and then you breed your 3rd ram to bring in those granddaughters, and then you can start over with that tier, which is important for genetic diversity. So, you know, it kind of goes into the specific breeds I'm working with, where they're not all that common and they are critically endangered. And so you really want to manage that genetic diversity, because the farmers who don't either just bring a new ram in every single year or have multiple rams, they start getting really wonky birth defects, and that's just not an experience I really feel like I need to participate in myself. So we've got the 1 ram this year. We are signed up to get another ram from Georgia in the spring when the farm who's using him is done with him, and then we'll probably try to get a 3rd ram at some point, just so in case we need to stay completely closed flock on our farm, we can. And then actually in Kentucky, there's quite a bit of interest in Gulf Coast Island sheep. So if we need to do some ram swapping, we have a little bit of a pool to work with, or we can sell starter flocks just from our farm with that. So anyway, that's our little sub farm bracket.
Your little family.
Huh?
Your little family.
Yeah, our little family. It's just, you know, checking off all those stereotypes of Kentucky families.
What about you, Kimmy? What's your numbers? What were your numbers before you sold? And then what are you looking for in California? What are your numbers looking at? What numbers are you looking at when you're in California?
So with my goats, I had one male. He did not need a companion. He didn't want a companion. I kept him separate from my girls. I tried to give him a friend. He was not interested. So I had him. His name was Boss Man. And then I had 9 females. I have had a previous male that I bred. So I had 2 different bloodlines. Again, all Nigerian dwarfs, but just two different families there. And then I was going to keep one of my males from this season to breed with the other bloodlines. So, and I had not worked out where I was going to keep him yet because Boss Man did not like to be with anyone else except for the females once a year. So that was one male. And then my sheep, I had a friend who had some sheep down the way from us, and I would borrow his male. So he would come, he'd hang out, and he'd stay anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. And then I was never sure whether it happened or not. And then spring would come, and sure enough, we'd have lambs. So I had 5 females. And then unfortunately this season I had a female who I was really hoping one of them would have a male this year. And the one that was pregnant with the male, her and the baby didn't make it. Mm-hmm. Well, that's just one of those tough things about farm life that I find, you kind of back to that social media and Instagram and everything looks shiny and pretty and the cute babies and all this stuff. One of the things that happens. And I was very lucky that my vet made it out in time and was there throughout the whole process. That's a whole nother podcast, but I was glad he was there to kind of help us through it. And that was our one male. So I had 5 female sheep. And then out in California, we're just going to have a smaller model. We're going to be on 2.5 acres. I do plan to have sheep and goats. I have not settled on a number yet, but it'll be small. I probably won't have any more than 6 total. And I will have all females. I will do borrowing of the males this time. I won't have any males on site.
Okay. Can you guys, before I get into my numbers, can you guys explain or tell me, like, were they all around the same age, or did you have a varying age group?
Mine's all varied. I started with my goats. I started 2 females and a male, and they were the same age. But I went through 4 generations, and I had gotten I had gotten one outside male in that whole process. So I had everybody from like the grandmas who were only maybe 5 years old to the babies who were a year old to the 2-year-olds who were going to be bred this upcoming season. So kind of just all over the map there. And my sheep, same thing. I had a few generations, anywhere from 4 to 5 years old to babies.
What about you, Rachel?
Our ram is 5 months old, I think. And then our ewes are all, I think, about 1.5 years-ish. Give it. So the ewes, and we didn't mean to do that. That's just kind of what was available to purchase. They all ended up being about 1 year, 1.5 years. So I didn't really want to get under 1 year for our first year, just because I did want to breed this fall. And you can breed sheep their first year. It's just, from what I can tell, if you give them like a whole 1.5 years to mature, then their ability to put more energy into giving birth healthily is greater than when they're smaller. But with the ram, I mean, it was basically like once he's weaned, I mean, that is one thing with, he looks like a baby. He does not look like he is ready to go, but he has let us know. Yeah. If we need those girls knocked up, he will go do so. So anyway, It's like, you're not tall enough, but.
Yeah, we were told that at least for East Frisians that because I think the dairy sheep tend to mature a lot faster. I think 5 months the males are ready, and about 7 to 8 the girls are ready. So the males definitely are more ready than the girls are.
Yeah.
And so we got 4 girls and a boy. We got 4 girls. I want to say it was the first week of February of this year. So they're about 8 months. And then we got him like 3 or 4 weeks after that. All babies. And yeah, it's very interesting because you'll hear varying degrees on like the like, should you breed them the first year? Should you wait? I don't know if there's a difference between like different breeds work better. We were told that actually younger, at least for East Frisians, was better because that's kind of what they're bred for. Is they're bred to kind of get started fast. So we do have them together this year. We just moved him. We moved him in at the beginning of this month. Poor thing. He keeps trying, and the girls want nothing to do with him. I think I actually saw one of the girls headbutt him when he tried. Like he tried, and then she turned around and like headbutted him and was like, "Get away from me." But I've also heard that like on the first year that sometimes it'll take a lot longer. Like some people are like, it could be October or November before the girls really get into heat. So we put them in now just because, February is probably the earliest we would want them to be born, the lambs to be born. And then we're like, okay with anything after that. But yeah, so our plan, so he was with the girls probably until June, because they were all still so young, it didn't really matter. And then we separated them because I was like, it's like I personally am having a baby the beginning of November. I was like, I don't want lambs in November and December. Like that is not even on accident. I'm like, I just don't want that to happen for me. And so we're like, we have to separate him, even if there is like no real chance that they could do anything because they're so young. I was like, we just can't take that chance. So we only recently brought them back together because I was like, February is a good time. That's the time that the people we got them from, lamb. And so we just kind of took our cues from the people we got them from, okay, well, this is your schedule. So we'll just kind of keep that going because obviously it works well for you guys. And because they're an official dairy, I was like, you guys, know more than I do. So we're just going to go with what you're doing. But like I said, and this is the like really frustrating things. The difference, like you guys said, between goats and sheep is like sometimes like it's so hard to tell if he's actually getting his job done. Like it's so, like someone told me, I think I read once that it was like sheep are very shy breeders. Like they don't want an audience. And a lot of times
yeah, that's what I heard too. It was like unless you pregnant or like there's those markers you can put or crayon or chalk or something for the rams, and they're like, that's really the only way you know if he's even mounted them, and then you don't know if it's taken until they start showing, unless you have Gulf Coast Island sheep, in which case you don't know until you see lambs in the paddock with them, which is going to be so fun. So
for us, they like, I heard that sometimes they'll do it at night. So unless you have a camera in at night, like you won't know. Heat, they said, like it's still been pretty hot. I would think Kimmy and I were talking about this. I don't know if it's the same in Kentucky, but it's just been still humid and kind of hot and muggy. And so like we were told that like sheep are less likely to want to do it when they start really wanting to once it starts to cool down, and it only like recently started to, and even then I don't know if it's gonna stick. And so there's like a bunch of like big question marks. We did the chalk collar, and he was kind of smearing them, but again, they were like running off. So like he could get it, but a little bit, but for the most part, they're just like, get away from me. And like, I don't know if it's the rain or what, because I was like, I don't know what he's smearing it on, but like the big thing of chalk is like now nothing. And I was like, that's not on all on their rear ends. Like, if it had smeared all of that on all of them, I think we would have noticed. So I'm like, so I don't know if he's like rubbing it against something else. But I was like, but that's like, it's so hard to tell because I'm like, now with the rain washed off whatever markings was on them. And now I'm not seeing anything because his chalk thing is like now nothing. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, we're just going to have to just wait and see. Cause I was like, we could keep buying the chalk thing, but I was like, I don't know. If they don't end up going into heat until, November or even December, I was like, that's a lot of chalk we'll be buying if it's, within a few weeks, it just goes away.
Yeah.
I was like, there might be a trick to keep that from happening, but I don't know it. But yeah, so.
Well, the males will pretty much mate anytime. They are ready to go anytime, both for the sheep and the goats. The females will only stand when they are absolutely in heat, and you've got like anywhere from a 12 to a 24-hour window.
Mm-hmm.
And the goats are very obvious with their behavior. They will call to the male. They will, especially my poor guy would be I'd have my girls out free grazing, and they would go over to his pen, and they would be like cats rubbing along the fence line, and he'd be going crazy, but it just wasn't time. I had like a very specific window that I was going to breed them for when I wanted to have babies. And the female goats would let you know, hey, I'm ready. And so for me, I could put them in, and I had the day. I could oftentimes watch the action going on, which makes you kind of feel like a pervert because you're there like,
and you're barking, right? Barking. You're like, okay, it happened this day.
And you count like 148 days. Okay, I'm gonna have a baby this day. But the sheep, the females are way more coy, and they don't show those obvious signs quite as much. The only thing I ever noticed was when the females kind of mounted each other. And then I would know, okay, they're ready to see the male. And then I would have to wait another 21 days before I introduced the male in hopes that they would go into heat again. But yeah, the males are always ready. The females, oftentimes, hopefully you get to catch it so you can predict when you'll have babies, but it's not always the case.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. So that's why I'm like, just fingers crossed, because I have not seen anything like that I would even call like a success. So I'm just like, I really hope something's going to happen now, because February is what I would prefer. And then, so we talked about the weathers. We are actually planning to, we're not quite sure if we're going to expand our flock or not. It kind of, we'll see depending on how much milk each one produces and how much we can handle, we may keep more of the girls. But then we'd have to get another ram. So we're not sure about that. But what we did think about is keeping one of the sons, if we do have any boys, and keeping him as a wether. In case we don't expand, then our male would have a buddy. Because he did okay by himself. Okay, I say okay. We tried to pin him into this little area and he got loose. But luckily he got loose into like the outer pasture. But it ended up getting him closer to the girls. But the girls, again, wanted nothing to do with him. So it was like not too horrible. And I think he felt like he was still part of the herd. So like he didn't have any personality issues, because I think he still felt like they're still right there. I'm not completely by myself. And he's an absolute sweetheart. Except for when we first initially moved him, he did quite a bit of headbutting, and my husband punched him. Because he's like, I'm going to be a ram, like act like another ram. And I'm just going to like, because that's what a ram would do. You're in my territory. You don't get to do that. So my husband's like, he's like, I'm called the ram puncher. And since I think he did it twice, and then he's like been a sweetheart ever since. So it was like, he had a little bit of attitude when we initially separated them. And then he kind of was like, okay, I get it. I'm okay. And so we do have a 2-year-old that we keep away from the ram. I don't know if you guys do that with, well, Rachel, you don't have any kids, correct?
Right. We don't have any kids. We do have kids that visit our farm pretty frequently just because we've got neighbors and I have friends and it's somewhat of a social life, sort of. And they bring their kids, which is another farm tip, is great for if you want to do day trips or like leave the farm, because then a lot of these moms are like, we get a 48-hour petting zoo for free and none of the responsibility of having an actual farm. So just there's that little free tidbit for you all. But I mean, we will have, like, this is the ram, you all do not go close to them unless, we're around you, just because, we did get a younger ram for that reason, is to try to keep him social and work with him and halter break him and that kind of stuff. So he's not, some crazy stallion you hear horror stories about or whatever. But even so, anyone with experience knows you just, they're testosterone poisoned, so you just don't expect them to be irrational all the time. So
yeah,
anyway.
for us, we kept our little one away from him until he settled, because there was a point where I put my hand on his head just as a way to like separate us, because I'm like uber pregnant, and I was like, the last thing I need is for the ram to hit me, but that kind of caused him to kind of back up. And so I was like, okay, I'm leaving the pen now. And then I was like, I'm not letting my little one in, except for like if my husband and I are both there, we will let her come in as long as we're both like keeping an eye on him. Not because he's really done anything anything towards her. Like most of the time he just comes up and sniffs her. But definitely like when it comes to rams and little kids, like you have to be very careful. For another tip that I read, and I can't even remember who I read it or where I read it, is that at least for rams, Kimmy, you can say if it's different for the goats. Don't pet them on the head, like on their noses. They say to like pet them under their chin, because that causes their head to go up, and they're less likely to headbutt because their heads are up. If you pet like this, even if you put a little pressure on them, they kind of feel that as a challenge and will more likely want to headbutt. Is that similar for goats?
Yeah, it can be very similar. First, you probably don't want to pet your male goat at all because they pee all over their face. Because they are that's like goat cologne for the females. So you really don't want to pet them hardly at all. Like I used to not even like to grab Boss Man by the collar because you would smell like him for like a day or two. So, but he would headbutt. Now the ram I had visit, he would free range with the girls. We had no issues with him. He was so wonderful and so sweet. And I think that's just the difference from animal to animal, no matter what type of animal you're talking about. My goat was bottle fed as a baby, very docile, used to follow us around like a dog. But once he hit like puberty, everything changed. And I can tell you just to continue watching your ram, because they will act differently when the female is in heat. And you may not even realize it because it is a short window, but all of a sudden the ram could be wonderful, both a ram or a goat, could be wonderful and sweet. And then the next day you come out and you turn around to feed them and they get you in the rear end or something. So when you least expect it, the female could be in heat, which causes them to act completely different. So even when you think, just like anything else, a dog or a cat or any farm livestock animal, they are animals, and you do have to kind of watch for those subtle cues. Plus, you just don't know when you put like a 2 or a 3-year-old, they're eye level with that animal, and it's looked at very differently from that animal's point of view. So I am very leery. Now, my 2-year-old, I'll throw them in the pen with the females. Like, they're not going to do anything. It was just strictly my male that I was always very cautious of. And really, I have a lot of nieces and nephews and a lot of friends with kids, and they range all the way up to, junior high age, high school age. And really, until they were bigger, taller, and not stronger than the animal, but able to get out of the animal's way, I was never comfortable with them in the pen with the male.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard too, is at least with little kids, like don't bring the ram, like don't leave them really alone, or even bring him in the pen. I have, because my little one started crying so bad because she was so used to him. I think he might be one of her favorites. And so like I was like, you can't come in here anymore because he's an adult. And she'd be like, I want to help. And I'm like, and so once we brought the girls back in, it was a little bit better, but she's actually more afraid, I think, of the girls than of the boy, which in the long run is probably not a good thing. Because the girls are just pushy. They love their food, and they were all bottle babies, so they have no problem around people, and they will just plow through her, especially if they think that me or my husband has food, and she's between even the girl sheep and us. They just run, and we have like a bucket or something, and they think something's in there. They will just run, and even if they don't plow her over, she gets scared because they're like running. And so she's like very attached to us now because she's been kind of pushed around a little bit. So even with the girls, if you have a little one, you just have to be a little bit more careful. And it really does depend, I think, on how friendly your sheep are. Because all of ours were bottle fed, they don't really run away. It's actually more of a nuisance because we can't get them to go away from us. As soon as we're in the pen, they think we've got food, and like we try to do chores in the pasture that they're in, and they're just all on top of us. And it's like, get away. Like I have to like tap their booties and be like, get away from us. Like we need to do stuff. We were moving like a pile of rocks, and one of them went over to the rocks and like peed on it. And I was like, that is not helping. I need you away, not peeing on everything. I'm trying to move. And so it's just one of those things where like each person's going to handle it differently, but definitely be careful with your rams and little ones. But even for the females, because I think, Kimmy, you have smaller sheep, right? I mean, we have really big, we've got nice average, good size, and they have wool too. So the more the year goes around, the bigger fluff balls they are. But
yeah, no, my sheep are regular size. They're just hair sheep, so you don't have that like extra volume with them. But they are tall and just bigger animals, and they're the same way. They are in my hip pocket at all times when I'm walking around. So same kind of thing, whether it's my dog's kind of pushing him around or the sheep or somebody's always hurting my 2-year-old.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, my I've got Icelandic Awasis, which are kind of a little bit of a smaller breed, and so are Gulf Coast. They're smaller, but the other day, they just all decided they weren't gonna leave the barn for some reason. So I had knelt down by the gate, and my husband was in the barn, and we're like, go get some grass. Like, what is wrong with you? And I was crouched down by the gate, and my husband said, like, shoo already, and they all just stampeded around the gate. And then and that stupid weather, he just decided he was going to take a flying leap and kick his back legs up in the air right next to my face. And so I jumped backwards, which saved me a really nasty bruise that would have made me look really terrible today. But I mean, we were both just like, wow, if we had had a kid in here or something, I mean, there's no guarantees, but it could have gotten really, really bad. So anyway, all that being said, I think that's, my husband and I joke when we have people with kids. We've got some friends who they're from St. Louis or some large city, and they come and they just have this very idyllic feeling of how it's going to be when they're on the farm. And we'll just gently ask the little 6-year-old to please not do that. And I finally pull the mom aside, and I'm like, do you know how many horrible stories I've heard of kids being killed very painfully? I mean, I don't want to freak anyone out, but I'm like, there's just a lot of ways to die on a farm. I mean, none of the equipment is our Tinker toys. I mean, they're all sharp, heavy metal objects, and like you said, animals are animals. I mean, you know, if sheep get spooked, they're not thinking rationally. They're just trying to go away. And if a kid's there, they don't care. So anyway, I just think, you know, I love my sheep and they're very friendly. I'm pretty sure one was a bottle baby too, but if she's in the right mood, you know, I just think, you know, if a child's old enough to like jump up a tree or something like that, then maybe they can be there by themselves. But toddlers, I'm just like, why don't you go feed the ducks? Like the ducks, you can stomp on if you need to, but not the sheep. So there's my little blithely without children 2 cents on that whole topic. But
Well, and
anyway.
it's also important to remember, my husband and I always used to say, because we've always had multiple dogs, not everybody has good dog etiquette.
Yeah.
So some people who are very used to being around dogs know that you don't, kind of like Delaney was saying, same thing with a dog. If you pet on top of their head and you don't know the dog, they can look at that as a sign of dominance, of you trying to dominate them, and they may not like it.
Yeah.
Or just other, like, I've taken my dogs to a dog park and I have a 6-year-old who we don't know run up from behind my dog and bear hug them. So scary things like that where you're like, don't have good dog etiquette. It's the same thing with a farm. Most people in today's society have never even visited a farm. So when they come, whether it's your own small children or visitors, not everybody has farm etiquette, and you kind of have to teach them those things. Don't spook sheep. Don't do this to the goats. Don't kick my chickens. Just
drop the duck, even if they poop on you, that will kill them.
Right. Yeah, don't climb on the heavy piece of machinery over here. You know, so that's something important to remember just in general.
I think that's one of those things that, like we'd mentioned before about having a mentor or even just visiting some farms. Like if you are like completely new and have absolutely no idea like what this even looks like, you know, go visit a farm, even if it's not like a goat farm or a sheep farm or anything that you like want to do, like even if it's just cow. I mean, cows are bigger, you have to be even more careful. But like go and ask those types of questions, you know. And I think one of the biggest things that a lot of newbies don't realize is that there is a lot going on than just having animals in your backyard. Like it is, and I don't want to freak anybody out, because I mean, once you do it and you learn and stuff like that, it's not like all that hard, but it is one of those things where like whether, you know, your infrastructure, what your purpose is for the animals, making sure that they're healthy, making sure they have their shots, you know, whether they're male or female, like there's so many different components that like you have to consider before you just go, oh, this is a really cute lamb, let's buy it and bring it home. Like
well,
I think
it's like the drive. Like that was one thing my husband and I realized the other day. We're like, it feels like, and we're 3 years in. I mean, we're not like, oh, this is our first breed of chick. Oh my gosh, can they have kitchen scraps and what kind? Like we're not at that level. but it's like learning how to drive, because you know when you first get in the car as that bright-eyed 14 or 15-year-old, depending on your state, and you're like, I finally get to drive to Walmart and get whatever. And they're like, okay, you got to look at the gas meter and the speed meter and check your rearview mirror and check your side mirrors. And, you know, there's all these things before you even start the ignition. And you're just like, this is not like driving a go-kart like I thought this entire time. You know, I think it's the same thing with farming. I mean, again, we all want nice, diversified farms, but you know, we finally just made a rule on our farm. We will not get more than 2 new species per year, which, you know, doesn't seem like a big thing, but it's like each species has their own little quirks. I mean, goats and sheep are incredibly similar in a lot of respects, and they're still completely different all at the same time. I mean, this got sheep and one little teeny tiny Angora bunny. And I really wanted to get a llama too. My husband's like, no, that's a 3rd species. And I'm like, that's a bunny.
a few more months.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, okay, it's September, January 1st. We're getting that llama. No, but you know, again, but still, like now I have to think, oh, I have to feed the bunny today and give him water. And it's not that big of a deal. Essentially a grade school pet sort of level, but still it's just one more thing to think about. And, you know, I love the idea of having kids on a farm, and I have great respect for everyone who is starting a farm with kids. But we've talked a couple times, we're like, it's a little easier to not have to worry about small critters with other small creatures interacting because, like one thing, just going back to the whole ram thing, out west hiking, they would say, if you're an adult hiking where there's mountain lions and jaguars and all that kind of stuff, if you're an adult, you look like a fellow predator. So they're not going to attack you as much as, say, a smaller child because they waddle. And so the child will look like more of a prey animal. And so, wildcats are more prone to attack a small animal. Again, I'm a great trivia person, so you're welcome. But it's kind of the same thing, like with the rams and other creatures too. Like, if my husband just looks at, and our dog in the eye and is like, sit down, I mean, she's down. But if, our best friend who has a 6-year-old comes over and, the dog and the 6-year-old love each other, the 6-year-old will be like, sit down, sit down, sit down. The dog just sneezes in her mouth. There's just a hierarchy. And I just don't think in our society right now, we really have it's in the front of our brain understanding, that, yeah, I'm glad there's animal rights and we've got these understandings of things we haven't in previous generations. But on the flip side, it's like animals are still animals. They're not humans. They don't think with their rational, logical brain ever, not just sometimes like as humans do. So they're wonderful and they're great, but there's just, you can tell your sheep he's a good old boy and you love him and you please don't kill the 2-year-old as much as you want to, and he just won't care.
Yeah.
So I know we're coming up on 2 hours. Do you guys have any last comments or anything you want to just mention? You guys can also share your social media platforms so that anyone who wants to follow you guys can follow you. We'll start with you, Kimmy.
Okay. Again, I'm Kimmy Trowbridge. We own Branley Farms. My Instagram page is Branley_farms, and we have a Facebook page, same thing, Branley Farms. We are currently in a move across the country, so you can follow our journey there, where we will be setting up a whole new farm. I would say my biggest piece of advice today is do your research before you bring your animals home. Don't wait until a day before it's going to freeze outside to say, oh, I need to build shelter for my animal. Don't wait until your animal's sick to start reaching out and trying to find a vet. Have all those things in place. It will make things go smoother for you, and it will be safer for the animal. You'll probably have more of a successful farming experience if you do it that way. Other than that, it's not rocket science. It is a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. So if it's something you're passionate about doing, by all means, do your research and then go for it. The farming community, I've been a part of it, I'd say the past 5 years, and everybody's wonderful. There's a lot of great resources out there. I mean, just through doing these talks with you, Delaney, I've met people that have been great and that I'm taking notes on and will try to keep in touch with throughout this process. So don't be afraid of it. Like I said, it's not rocket science. It's a lot of fun. So join the community thinking about it.
Join us.
Yeah.
One of us.
All right, Rachel, go ahead.
My Instagram is Whoopsie Daisy Farm, just all one word, and we'd love to have you follow us. We're not experts. Again, I mean, we decided to do this because we thought, let's just start a farm and just make our own food cheaper, and but I guess my piece of advice would be I attended a Profitable Farm workshop a couple years ago, and it had Charlotte Smith and Joel Salatin and one other lady, I can't remember her name, but those two are great. If you haven't heard of them, like, just read everything those two have to say because it's great. But one thing Charlotte Smith said was, only 2% of farms in the United States last past 5 years. And if you think about it, like when you learn a new skill, it takes about 5 years before you've got that skill learned. So I think a lot of us have this belief that, you know, our ancestors did this, and so we should be able to do this too. And I mean, it's kind of like parenting, like, well, everyone does this, so we'll just do it. And then you actually start doing it and you're like, why isn't the human species dead? I mean, I don't understand. So I would just say, you know, just stick with it, because if you are still here after 5 years, then you're successful. Even if all your animals are dead, you're still here, you're still successful. You don't want them to be dead. So I would just encourage you, you know, stick with it. But, you know, like Karen said, you know, do your homework, because, you know, we think we should just be able to dive into this, and, you know, it's a wonderful journey and a wonderful adventure, and it is a learning curve, and it's a skill set that we don't really have in our culture anymore. So I'll be quiet now.
I guess my piece of advice would just kind of echo you guys is, you know, find someone who knows something similar to what you want to do, and learn as much from that individual person as possible. Because like we talked about, there's books, but the animals don't always follow the books. So like you need to kind of get some real life talk, and not just go by the books, because the books are going to have all the nice, pretty numbers, but you know, the nitty gritty, dealing with, you know, deaths and shots. My biggest meltdown was trying to give our ram his shots, because I've never given shots to any animal before. And that was my like biggest, like, why am I doing this? I'm just hurting them. I'm just going to kill him. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. You know, and I even had somebody come over and help me with the girls, and I still freaked out, because when I did it by myself, I just felt like I felt like I didn't know if I needed to deal what I was doing. You know, and I still had help, and I still freaked out. So, you know, the whole sticking with it, I think going to it with a purpose behind it as well, I think helps. Not just this is a cute animal, but what is the use for these animals? Because a lot of the animals that we have on our farm have a purpose. You know, the chickens or the birds, you know, they're either meat or eggs. I think it sounds like we're all doing kind of dairy for our ruminants. But Rachel, I know you said you were doing wool as well. So just kind of knowing ahead of time what your purpose for the animals is helps too, because that will inform a lot of your decisions and choices, and a lot of the information as well. Yeah. And I also think just having an idea of what you can afford, like your resources, I guess, which is also, you know, your money, but your pastures, and like just taking stock of what you have.
And your time.
And your time.
Time is a big thing for us right now. It's just, we budget our finances and we budget our time, because it's like, you can blink and a whole afternoon's gone, and you're like, what did I just do? Anyway, sorry.
But that's absolutely true. Like when we started, I was working full time, and we had lambs and bottle fed lambs. And so when we did it, I had a job because I was a nanny that my wonderful boss allowed me to take her kids to the farm so I could bottle feed. But like not everybody has that flexibility. I know some people have even brought their lambs to their work and left them in the car because it was winter and it wasn't too hot, and we're feeding them at their lunch break. So, you know, like, yeah, that time, the effort. My husband and I, we have health issues. That's just something that we deal with. And so like there's been weekends where he hurt his back, and all of a sudden like that whole weekend shot because I'm pregnant, I can't do anything, and then his back is killing him. And that like pushes our schedule of like what we wanted to do back. But we know that we have health issues. We know that we're struggling with certain things. We know that I'm pregnant. So like, you know, you just take stock. And I think, you know, just reviewing that consistently, like not just doing it at the very beginning and being like, this is what we have, this is what we have to work with. It's like, no, like every month or every 2 months, take stock of what you have, what you need, the finances, the time. You know, a lot of us were talking about certain farms that were downsizing because they realized they just couldn't handle the amount of what they had. And I think that you have to take that into account in the numbers that you choose to take on. You know, we knew that about the lamb situation and that my boss was okay with it because she grew up in kind of farm community, so she was perfectly okay with that. But if I had a boss that was like, absolutely not, I don't want my kids around that, then that would have changed our decision, you know, as well. So yeah, so my thing is just take stock of your resources and continue to do that throughout your journey, because things change. You know, COVID hit and like changed everybody. Everybody's world turned upside down. So like, you know, you could have thought you were going into goats and all of a sudden you're going into sheep, and like things that happen.
Going with the resources thing, I mean, I think it's about every 2 months. We don't schedule it. It just happens. About every 2 months, we look at everything on the farm and are just asking, like, except for the honeybees. We've never had that conversation with them, but everything else, you know, we had a really long talk this spring, like, do we need to stay in chickens? Because at that point they were taking the most resources and giving the least amount of returns. And we're just like, you know, they're great. I mean, they're the quintessential farm animal is get chickens, but are they really helping us with the goals we have on our farm? And, you know, like you said, know your why. Why are you doing this? Are you doing this because you just, you know, slipped on a banana peel, ended up in Tractor Supply one day and there were fluffy chicks and you thought, I'll get a farm? I mean, there are some people who do that, you know, or, you know, is it like, you have health issues and you need a viable source of this particular food product. And so you have to succeed, because if you don't, you're going to be on a feeding tube. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you have a real hardcore reason why to do this, you will stick with it. But if you're getting into it because you think it's fun and you had a beloved children's book as a kid and it looks easy and you like baby animals, then film it. Like make movies about everyone else doing it. Because
do farm tours.
Yes,
get a little shot of farming, but like
yeah. Well, because I mean, if you have livestock, this one British guy said this, if you have livestock, you will have dead stock.
Absolutely.
You know, they're not gonna stay healthy and happy and well trained. I mean, we thought we were prepared. We got our 2 sheep home and we're like, how do we get them from the trailer to the paddock?
Right.
Like we just didn't think about that. So I think my husband grabbed them by the 2 front hooves and dragged them across about an acre. And he's got scoliosis and kyphosis, so it was not a good thing. Anyway, that's a whole nother. I love talking to farmers. I could probably just sit here and chew the fat with you ladies and just be like, well, what's your horror story about such and such?
Right.
Well, that's another thing, that like if you have a hard time dealing with dead animals, like that's something you need to consider too, because like for us, we've already had the conversation of what happens in lambing season when a lamb doesn't make it, or a sheep. Like where do you take them? What happens?
Yeah.
You don't know. We had a chicken that passed away for, we don't know why. We have an idea, but it's, you know, it's hard to like absolutely know. For us, we like burned it. We had to burn a bunch of the stuff around it because it was, you know, everything around it was sick, assuming it was what we think it was. You know, and it was like, that's nice for a small animal, but these are a lot bigger. So what do you do with the larger animals when they die? Like when something happens?
I mean, he's got a gorgeous fleece. I'm telling you, ladies, as a fiber artist, it is hurting me to think that I will not harvest his fleece for years to come, because it's beautiful. But he does not fit our farming paradigm. And I mean, you know, my big concern right now with this whole COVID thing and just watching, you know, there was a huge chick shortage because everyone bought out chicks when COVID hit, because we all wanted eggs because we were all paranoid. That's wonderful. Did any of those people think how much poop those birds are going to make when they're adults? I mean, you know, a lot of people think they're going to have this beautiful, idyllic Narnia farm where the animals just tell them nicely what they prefer today. And it's like, I cannot tell you the amount of times we've walked out and there have been dead chickens for no reason. Like, and then we found out it was our rooster was actually loving them to death. Not even joking. And so we're like, okay, so again, he's this beautiful, beautiful, rare breed, but it's like, you're going to be delicious. So, and I think that's one thing where I have talked to a lot of farmers who they love their animals, and you should love your animals. Like, you shouldn't hate your animals. If you hate them, you're not going to stay in farming. That being said, you have to be willing to do what it takes for the good of your entire farm. I mean, idealism is a wonderful thing to get you started in this. It is a wonderful thing to get you started, and that's where you paint that why on your wall so you see it every day. But idealism is not sustainable. I mean, I asked several people in sheep groups, what do I do with this weather? And it was basically do animal rehab with him. And it's like, I have bees and ducks and chickens and 2 geese and a rabbit and a husband who works an incredibly stressful job, and I would like to have a social life every now and again. I can't do sheep rehab right now, and he's really tasty. So, like, that's the same on our.
That goes to the resource. That goes to the resources, right?
Yeah.
That like, for us, our purpose in going into dairy sheep is to potentially make it into a business so that we're producing sheep's milk ice cream.
Yeah.
But so if we have, like, we've talked about the five that we have, and I was like, if one of these girls don't produce anything, like if they don't have babies, if they don't produce milk, what do we do with them? Because they're just going to gobble up resources.
Yeah.
And in my head, I'm like, well, they're our first, so maybe we'll keep our first round. And, maybe they can be like our ambassadors and be like the people who come to our farm. And this is, you can pet these because they're not pregnant. They're not going to be with the ram, and I was like trying to find these ways, but I was like, in the end, if it really comes down to, it's not worth it, where, most farms are not made of money. You have to cut corners, or not cut corners, but you got to cut it down to what you can afford and what you can handle. And if that means that one goat or that one sheep is not doing what you need it to do, then it's got to go. And that's one of those hard decisions. And I know we've talked a lot about like the rough stuff, but I mean, it is like wonderful for like me to see my toddler with the animals and really know that she loves to help. That's her thing. She's just, I want to help. Let me help you. I want to help, and like how many people in this world are just givers who want to just help in any way they can, so there's so many lessons that can be learned on a farm that are so positive. And there's stuff that I'm learning too. Patience. Hello.
You're learning that? I have not gotten that.
I like, not just with the toddler, just dealing with like the sheep. It's like, oh my gosh. So like there's so many benefits and so many blessings that come from a farm that like we haven't really talked a ton about, because that's not really what this topic was really about. It's more about just the pros and cons and all that good and bad stuff that goes with buying your sheep and your goats. But there is a blessing to it, and I think as long as you go into it with all the things that we've talked about, with a good head on your shoulder and kind of knowing what your purpose is, then you're gonna have fun. Even with the hard stuff, there's gonna be the more better days than hard days.
It's kind of like marriage. Just sorry for the single people out there watching this, but if you think about it, it's kind of like marriage. I mean, you go in and you've got stars in your eyes, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful, and this is your best friend, and you've got this wonderful plan for your future. And then you get over which way does the toilet paper go and which end do you push the toothpaste from, and you're like, oh, the first year is so hard, and then you get into like year 4 and you're like, why haven't I murdered you yet? You are such a horrible specimen of humanity. And then like you stick with it past that, and then you're like, okay, you bleed red, I do, and you kind of figure out a groove and you make it work. And there's pros and cons to being single and being married. And it's the same thing with farming. I think like, if you cannot handle the thought of getting some animal fluid on you pretty much every day, don't go into farming. I mean, if you cannot handle the thought of, of having to bury your first chick or eat your first chick or something like that, I mean, if that crushes your soul, then do farm tours. But I mean, if you like watching, you know, like NCIS and figuring out like who done it and what does that look like, and you can, you know, you're like, okay, there's this weird substance flowing from some animal's nose. Like, is that normal or is that bad? And it's a challenge to you. You know, you're gonna have a lot of fulfillment and you're gonna grow and all that kind of stuff, but probably none of the things that you think are gonna give you fulfillment will. It'll be all these unexpected things. I mean, my husband never would have said when we got this farm that butchering his own chickens would just, you know, like make, like, I don't mean the killing, I mean like preparing his own food and providing for us and going, I can actually provide viscerally for my family if I have to. Like, that just has helped him stay calm throughout this whole pandemic more than anything else, because he's like, you know, if we have to, I can go get a squirrel and I can make soup out of it that night. We're good. That's not something we would have thought was going to give us fulfillment when we started this whole thing. So I just think if you can be flexible, if you can still learn, if you can adjust in your ideals and, you know, stick with it, farming is for you. But I mean, if you've got to have it exactly your way and exactly this way, and it has to be sunshine and roses every single day, visit us. We will gladly sell you our eggs. We will sell you our milk. We will love you. Just don't try it, because you probably won't be happy. So,
and sometimes you don't know until you're in it. And that's why you start small as possible. Because sometimes you think you want this, you think you want something, then you get into it and be like, no. You know, that's why a lot of people they say that their intro is their chickens, because that's kind of the smallest animal that like you can kind of start having, you know, where you can do all the butchering and the stuff like that, where, you know, you can kind of get a feel to see if that's something that's what you want to do or if you don't. But anyway, I know we're really crazy over. But thank you guys so much for coming on here and talking. I, like Rachel, I was like, I could talk about this forever. So thank you guys so much for coming and sharing your experiences and your stories. This is just going to be so much fun. I think our audience is really going to love this. So thank you guys so much.
Absolutely. It was fun.